What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to My Social Life. This is the podcast where you can hear the real stories behind the people on social media. I'm your host, Jacob Kelly. As always, today's podcast is powered by Trufan, and today's an episode of The Social Report. And The Social Report is a monthly bonus episode we do here in conjunction with Trufan, where we sit down and break down some of the most recent, biggest, and interesting social media and influencer marketing news from the last 30 days. As always, today on the podcast, I am joined by Trufan Chief Growth Officer Scott Birdie and Trufan's Chief Marketing Officer Karen O'Brien. Welcome back to the show.
Welcome back.
Great to be here as always, Jacob.
I'm excited to have you both here. Where I want to start today's social report, I want to start with Apple's privacy changes. So we put up a post on Trufan's Instagram a little while ago. I'll make sure I link it in the show notes. It's just a brief overview of what's going on. But back in September, Apple announced that they will be updating their privacy settings, their privacy regulations, however you want to call it. And now all developers have to do two primary things when it comes to privacy on iPhones. You have to, one, on the app's page, like when you go to download the app, you have to list all of the things you're tracking and what you're tracking it for. And two, you also have to have a pop-up now when they first download the app, and they have to opt into being tracked. So consumers now have the ability to opt out of being tracked, meaning you can't track them on anything. And I believe that includes the websites so if you're on Safari and things like that. So consumers now have the ability to just block tracking on an iPhone, essentially. So I'm curious to know, actually, before I'm curious about what you think, Facebook obviously isn't happy because that negatively impacts their ad product. They took out a couple of different newspaper ads and prominent newspapers just kind of saying that Apple is against small business. They have a whole marketing campaign, a website around the small businesses on Facebook and how these changes by Apple are negatively impacting these small businesses. And so I'm curious to know what you both think how these changes will impact the marketing industry. I looked, and the most recent stat I could find was 2018, 45% of phones in the US are iPhones. That's about half of the market will have the ability to turn tracking off for places like Facebook. I'm assuming we're going to see other phone brands follow suit. I mean, Google's already eliminating third-party cookies by the end of this year, according to the timeline they set last year. So I wouldn't be shocked if the Pixel does it and if Samsung follows suit shortly after that. But I want to know what you two think, how this will impact the marketing industry.
Well, I could start. I mean, I think from Apple's standpoint, I can see both sides. From Apple's standpoint, they would say we're standing up for users, that users have a right to know how their data is being used, how it's tracked, what it's being used for. I think the other side of this, obviously, Facebook has some very, they have a reason why they are putting out these ads, right? They stand to lose ad revenue. But they are not wrong in saying that small businesses use social media ads. And there's a prediction, I think it was in some of Facebook's ad copy, basically on these anti-Apple privacy changes ads, basically saying that 44% of small businesses use personalized data on social media ads, and that they stand to lose about 60% of their revenue for every dollar that they spend. So it's a substantial cut. It's going to be a substantial cut. Now, do we think that consumers will completely opt out?
I don't know. I think it's going to be so easy to opt out.
Will you?
I don't have an iPhone.
I haven't gone in and checked my privacy settings. I still have not updated them. So
I think it's on iOS 14 that it's.
Oh yeah, I should have mentioned this hasn't come out. Yeah, this hasn't come out yet. It was going to come out last year, but Apple pushed it to just TBA 2021, so developers had time to catch up on the changes.
Mm-hmm. And Facebook's putting it forth that it's a forced update, that consumers will have no choice but to make a choice. And I guess if you don't opt in, are you opting out? Like, are you opted out immediately? Which way is it swinging?
So how it works is it'll be like a pop-up, like Apple CEO Tim Cook shared kind of like an example of what it'll look like. And it'll be like an opt-in or opt-out. So you have to click one or the other when you make the decision. So you can't just ignore the choice. You have to actively choose.
Well, they're going to force you to choose.
From my understanding, yeah.
Okay. That's good.
I mean, there's a few sides to this that I find really interesting to just look at. Like the marketing industry as a whole, as Karen just touched on, is naturally going to be hugely affected. Like from brands to agencies, the major agencies that represent some of the world's biggest brands, like everybody's slowly losing a little bit of the grip on targeting that they maybe once had, right? When these changes come into play. But between the PR spins that are being thrown out there, particularly by Facebook, and then I'll get to Apple, maybe what I think of them in a second. But Facebook's positioning of Apple versus the free internet, and this whole stance that their products, for sure enable SMBs, but like enable the internet to be free, and like for those users who want to leverage social media networks and such. I think we've all, I mean, maybe we don't realize this and they can hide it behind that type of messaging, but it's not free when you're knowingly giving up your data. Like you may not be paying with financial means or, actually monetary value, but you're giving up freedoms in some respect, which is actually, to some degree, much more valuable than the monetary aspect itself. And going back 4 years to Cambridge Analytica and, some of the hot water that Facebook found itself in, it's pretty interesting to see them, throwing so much backlash at a move which is actually just aimed at what Karen said, at least from a visual standpoint to the public, user privacy. And Apple should have the right to look at it that way because they were the more savvy of these two companies to build not just software or products on the internet, but hardware. So by means of having these millions and millions of users use their hardware, they have the right to control the types of means that these users have for their data. So I think on that front, it's pretty interesting for Facebook to just go out and say, like, it's Apple versus the free internet, because equally, I'm sure Apple has helped tons and tons of small business owners, just albeit not the same way that Facebook does through ads. Secondly to that, flipping the script a little bit, I would say that the scary part about this, looking at it, from Apple and what they can then do as the pure owners of your data, because they either way have a sense of what you're doing on your phone, like they actually will have that become much more of a competitive advantage in the future, where means of they own data that many of these other giants potentially do not, or can track certain, people in societies that Facebook cannot. And so, I think almost like looking ahead 5-10 years, like you can kind of think of this as a bit of like a maybe Netflix type of ordeal, where now there's going to be these other players that recognize they have some, not necessarily proprietary right, but like direct ownership over where the data tracking starts. I don't know. And it's quite scary to think about what a company of that scale could also do with data that other companies potentially don't have. So I don't know. There's just a lot of like uncertainties for me anyways, like looking from the outside in at this to say, like, I'm not sure if this is actually like helping consumers. It's certainly going to suck a little bit for small businesses in the long run, but I think it'll force them to think a little bit more strategically as well, and sink less money just into ads, because that's a way to revenue quick.
Yeah. I mean, there's a couple sides to it, right? Like social marketers, real social marketers would tell you, you need to be more social in social, small business, like stop throwing ads at people, actually engage with your consumers, actually care about what their needs are. It's become, I think, too easy to just throw a social media ad up and expect that that's going to do your business for you. On the other side of that, anyone who has ever been old enough to basically experience a browser without personalization and browser results and what that looks like, ads being served to you, you might want to think about, do you actually want to opt in?
Yeah, I personally, on the note of whether or not you like personalization, like I would opt for personalization. No, I think most of my data is already owned by this point somewhere.
Yeah. I think most people are good with it. They just don't want their data to be used for bad purposes, right? But what is bad is subjective to everyone, is the problem.
Yeah, I think data collection is a PR issue right now, because I feel like with movies like what was it called that just came out, the documentary,
The Social Footprint or whatever it was, like
yeah,
something like
what was
that.
it called? I watched it like a month ago.
Social Dilemma.
Social dilemmas. I think like data collection and social media and tracking users has bad PR right now. Like when people hear that, they think of it in a very negative context. So I think people are going to opt out for that reason. And if they do, I think brands are going to have to focus on manufacturing their data collection, like with email lists and things like that. And it's going to be a challenge, I think, to do that properly. I think it's going to force a lot of brands to get creative. I'm assuming influencer marketing is going to become even more popular than it already is, just because you can be somewhat more targeted with, well, you more than someone, you can be a lot more targeted with that if you have a good relationship with that influencer and you know what their audience is like.
And offer something of value in exchange for people giving you their data.
Mm-hmm. That's actually a really interesting point you bring up too, Jacob, is how through the transition, influencers actually, may see a slight bump in their value, especially those that are a bit more prone or open to sharing information with the brands that they work with on their audience, because that really shows like how confident you may actually be in your the strength of your community, and how much you've done to grow that. But super interesting. I mean, get your popcorn ready, folks, and your iPhones. Yeah. Speaking of like Facebook, I guess, or yeah, like, well, I was just gonna say, I mean, Karen brought up some pretty some interesting happenings, on the side of Facebook and Facebook advertising, and some of their I don't know, what would you call those actions that they've been taking, Karen? um,
I've heard from a few business owners who've had their business manager account indefinitely disabled. And, Facebook has not told them why. And in this one instance, I'm thinking of this, it's a small agency who's been in business for 14 years doing Facebook ads. And there's no appeal. There's no way to reactivate. I mean, they are literally hitting a dead wall. And what's kind of ironic is that this agency not only has been compliant for 14 years, but they've also taught rules on ad compliance to other agencies and brands. And there's no recourse. And so I think what's kind of ironic about that is, their competitors, Google, Snap, LinkedIn, TikTok, they're all reaching out with open arms, and in many cases, even giving them ad credits, saying, yeah, like, this is a problem. And this agency has heard literally from hundreds of other marketers who've had issues with Facebook banning them for no apparent reason and just not providing any recourse for them to resolve it. And to this day, this happened about a week ago, they still don't know why they were taken down. I suspect it could be something very small, like a complaint about an ad or a complaint about a piece of content, but they don't even know why. And so I guess I look at both sides of this and say, how is this helping Facebook to drive revenue and reputation at a time when they need a good reputation? And it's certainly disabling some small businesses.
yeah. And the first thought that comes to mind is like, and I don't expect either of you to have the answer, is really like, why is it that nobody can have any semblance of information
There's no
as to
transparency
why? And
in the
like,
rules.
why is Facebook not, intentionally hiding this transparency? But why is there not transparency? And I guess the only thought it comes up is when I think about their ad approval process, and watching some of those past clips of courtrooms and stuff like that with Mark, dealing with the various ones he's been in, it sounds as though like a lot of third parties handle that work. And I just, for one of basically like how you monetize your business, how can you be allowing, I don't know if it is the third parties potentially making these mistakes or a combination of both parties and the miscommunication or lack, you know but like how can this be happening if this is your predominant revenue stream? This is literally, from a PR standpoint, how you position yourself as a community builder, and something that helps SMB build in a time like this. But letting this stuff happen, like it seems highly unacceptable, yet
My
totally
hypothesis
acceptable to
is
them.
that they've just become too big to actually manage it. And if you are a business, even if you spend $10 million on Facebook ads, if you are buying your media directly through ads manager, you're not buying it through a rep, you basically have little or no recourse because you're kind of self-managed. And I think that's the area where I think a lot of these sort of businesses fall through the cracks and there's a lot more support needed.
And then I think to your point too was the fact that like a lot of it being handled by a third party. You think that even though in the review process they catch whatever it is, these terms that they're violating, like how is it that bad that your account can get deleted, but it can get through the review process with flying colors?
I don't even know what the review process is. Is it handled by humans? Is it machine reviewed? I don't know.
I'm not sure.
Yeah, I mean, I brought this up a little earlier just between the two of us, but I had an instance where some of the first Facebook ads I ever ran a couple years ago were approved, actually ran, got results, and then about 2 to 3 weeks later, when I logged back into the account to, create another couple ads or whatever, I noticed that I was disabled. My account had been disabled, and I could request or, basically flag it to appeal that, and I did. And I ended up getting an email about between 20 to 30 days later saying that my appeal had been seen and that my account had been incorrectly, deactivated or whatever it is. And I can tell you right now, like the ads that I ran were for a simple giveaway. I'm pretty sure it was a company that was giving away like 2 Lakers tickets on Christmas Day or something like that. Made it through, so less than 25% text, and it still never got reactivated. So I ended up like I think it was about a year ago when I needed to run a couple more. I had to create a new ad account. Like I had to go through the whole process again. And it's just a pain in the ass because like I think about this from if I was an actual business owner and I had a lot on the line, like that next week when I logged in to run some ads and like drive revenue, drive people into my store, and that's not up. And then it takes 20, 30, 40, maybe more days to actually resume that type of I mean, it's totally unacceptable in any way. And then I think there's this sort of Instagram to this equation where it's not necessarily ads and the actual business manager that you're getting deactivated. Like we directly heard in the first part of this year that there was like a host of cannabis accounts that I'll just like leave unnamed, but we've heard from a couple clients in the agency space that represent these accounts that they were just straight up taken off of Instagram. Little to no information as to why, but removed outright. And there's no way of getting these accounts back.
I've also heard that the few people I've heard of that have been reactivated, that they've lost all their data. Like it's kind of like they've been reset. And so all of their ad data, all of their, audience
Hours
data
of
is gone.
time too. Like
Mm-hmm.
Facebook could be doing better, at least on some level of recourse. Like
Mm-hmm.
if you know that you've really fucked up or
Yep.
something like that, like what can you also be doing to help these people?
I kind of feel like it's become such a bigger issue, during the election or around since the election, probably because Facebook has been trying to do more to get rid of hate speech and other objectionable things on their platform, right? It's probably the review process has probably gotten caught up with that. I wouldn't be surprised if some of these things turn out that someone has reported an ad or reported a piece of content or something and it's gotten caught in that process. But there's a jury now, right, that basically is deciding these bigger issues. And I really feel like some of these, mid-size agencies that have been shut down or, small businesses should get together and basically ask this to be put in front of the Facebook jury. Like, what is the resolution for us for all of these, hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of businesses that have been shut down or disabled at some point and are paying a lot of ad revenue? They deserve to be heard, in my opinion.
I just think it's ironic based off of like our previous conversation where Facebook is banging the drum of small business empowerment and they are like kneecapping these businesses without forewarning. And like they're part of their campaign with Apple is how so many small businesses rely heavily on Facebook and do a majority of their advertising on Facebook, but then they're taking small businesses off their ad platform with no reason and no way to get back on. I just think it's kind of ironic the way that they're banging the drum on one side, but on when it's in their own backyard, they're not doing much about it.
What's been shocking to me is some of like this one agency that I just sort of referred to, they've been Facebook's biggest evangelist, like amongst the small business community. And so even when things, were going bad at one point or another with Facebook, they were always defending them. So I think there's a bigger issue here beyond just follow up. It's reputation. At some point, you have to do something to, you have to stand up and basically do something. I do applaud them, though, for making some of the changes of political handles that they have put on pause.
Yeah. And actually, while we're on that subject, shout out to Twitter.
Yeah.
They made history since we last recorded one of these podcasts. Fucking best move on social ever.
Yeah. And not everyone agrees with that, though, Scott. There are people who think it's wrong, and they're not necessarily supporters of that administration.
And I'm not saying you're wrong, but we all
I think it was
can
great.
Breathe a little easier.
I'll publicly say I think it was great.
Yeah.
I personally am enjoying reading the news and things that are happening on Twitter around the world now without it being 99% Trump.
What about Clubhouse, though? Does he have his Clubhouse set up now?
I don't know. Is he on Clubhouse? I don't know. I think his
so.
family has discouraged him from getting on other platforms right now.
Oh, that would be good.
I don't think he's got an invite to Clubhouse yet. But have you two actually, before we dive into Clubhouse, have either of you two gotten on it yet?
Oh, yeah. I've been on it for a while.
I've been on it. Yeah. I haven't delved into it too much, but I was lucky to get an invite at one point.
Yeah. So I got one last week, I think, when I finally got on, which is funny because I've been following them since launch. They launched in March, and I happened to be really deep into following everyone in VC Twitter at that point in time. So it was all over my Twitter, and I had no idea how to get onto this app when it first launched. But I was just Googling them today because I wanted to bring it up on the podcast. And they had $100 million valuation when they had 1,500 users. Their valuations, I feel like, are sky high. They just passed 2 million users. They're valued at over $1 billion right now, reportedly. That number's not confirmed, but that's what the reports are saying. They have $1 billion valuation after their most recent round, and they just passed 2 million users. So, I just think their valuations, granted, nowhere near an expert, but just from my understanding, I feel like that's really high. And so, anecdotally, from my experience on Clubhouse, I haven't really, to your point, I haven't delved into it a ton either. I think part of the issue for me is the fact that it's just it's a social platform that requires a huge time commitment. If you actually want to participate and be active on Clubhouse, these rooms are 60 to 90 minutes. I don't have time out of my day to just carve 90 minutes to be in a Clubhouse room. And on top of that too, but there is definite power. From my understanding, it's a great networking platform. I found another article too, Grant Cardone on a Clubhouse room raised $8.5 million for his real estate fund called Cardone Equity Fund 11. So he raised $8.5 million on a Clubhouse room, which is great. But longevity wise, especially in a non-COVID world where people are leaving their house and they're not bored looking for things to do, how do you convince people to carve an hour and a half out of their day per room to be on this app? Because if you jump into a room for 3 minutes, I feel like you're not getting the same experience that you are if you have to be on there 60 to 90 minutes at a time. So that's just been my biggest hurdle is I don't have the time to give to be on Clubhouse. I want to be. It's audio first, which is lends to my skill set, but the time commitment for Clubhouse is really hard for me to get around. So I'm curious kind of what you both think about the platform as a whole, about longevity of it and the crazy valuations they've been getting.
I love it. I love it because of the quality of people that I've seen in it in the beginning. I know that may change over time, but some of the early adopters, they've been the kind of people and the kind of topics that are very relevant to me, that I would probably even show up at a physical event, even during COVID, to be able to see or talk with. So it's been at that level. I think it'll be interesting to see if they can keep up that level of quality. Now, one thing about Clubhouse is they're not moderated yet heavily, right? But I have seen a few instances where there have been people that have just, they've taken the stage and then they've been super salesy or very self-absorbed, and it's been hard to get them off. Right. So there's been some management issues in some of those sessions I've been in. But yeah, you need to show up and be fully present.
Which is, I'd like to your point. I actually was just listening earlier today to a podcast with a podcast alumni, Buster Share. He interviewed the founder of Complex, and they were talking about Clubhouse, and they were talking about how they've found themselves in rooms where it's just like course salesmen, like snake oil salesmen who have never built anything. They're just really good at convincing people, like they sell the dream and then they sell their course and they're gone. And they just have turned it into like their virtual soapbox to promote their course that doesn't actually do anything.
I think similar to Parlor, it has the potential to really go south. So I think that they're going to have to put some guideposts in for terms and conditions and potentially moderation, and I don't know what else. But
how are they monetizing right now? Like directly off of ads is one way, or no?
I don't know. I don't think they are monetizing right now, are they?
No, I don't, not that I've seen. I mean, granted, I probably spent like 12 minutes total on the app, but I don't remember seeing an ad.
The other thing is Twitter Spaces is a direct competitor, right? So I don't know if any of you have seen Twitter Spaces or heard about it. It's in beta testing right now, but it's an audio space. I believe on Twitter that'll be a competitor.
Oh, totally. Especially if you're like some of these people, like if Clubhouse only has 2 million followers and you have a 3 million followers baked into your Twitter audience already, like why go to Clubhouse unless you want a more intimate experience? But if you already have a huge audience on Twitter, what's pulling you to Clubhouse to try and start from scratch there?
My hypothesis is that Twitter moved so far away from what they really are at the core, which is the water cooler conversation. They tried to be so much more like Facebook and other platforms. And I think their core is really the conversation. And so I think, audio was a next first step, and Clubhouse got there first.
Well, I mean, to your point, Jacob, about how and why things could really go south for them, in the future of things getting back to in real life, really, and like in-person experiences. Um, I think there's a lot of social media users that are a little bit either frustrated or a little bit tired of whatever it is, whatever reason. They've kind of just swayed away from putting as much effort as they maybe have in the past into those social platforms, and then see, for a variety of reasons, Clubhouse to be this kind of pragmatic approach to social media, if you will, right? That's like, there's not much in theory to it. Like, it's just like there's a lot of ways to network, get a job, sell, like, drive certain actions or outcomes quickly for yourself. And so the people who are looking for those outcomes are really flocking to that and probably like leveraging it for whatever it can be used for right now. And I think that can be seen in like, the personal development sides of the people who are probably purchasing a lot of those courses and finding that there's such amazing new, never before found resources for like improvements and little things that they haven't been considering. Kind of like a more professional or kind of macro version of TikTok, and the type of content that gets served up on there. And then the flip side where the salespeople, the people who are actually just trying to drive their business through these different online channels, and like they're just looking for the next best one to drive some results for a short period of time. So like when you look forward, I mean, I wouldn't say those pragmatic users are the most loyal users potentially, and I'm not saying that those would be all of the types of people who are flocking to Clubhouse, most certainly, but a lot of the other ones, like Jacob, you and I sound like when Karen sounds, she's a bit more into the community and a little bit more established, but like I think we're just as interested in the app as anything else, just because of the testing and just seeing like what is it, like, what are people interested in, and I think that's kind of the danger behind their whole referral model, right? Is like you're supposed to have like good. I think like their thing is they track usage from your referrals so that like you don't get referral links just because. And I don't know this for sure, but it sounded like when I got one from a user, she was like kind of worried, and rightfully so. Like I haven't used it quite as much as I probably could have. That I was going to be like her last invite or something. She got another one right after, so she must be a great user. But you know what I
Only
mean?
get
Like that
5.
sort of ideology only get 5. So if you start sending it out to people who low-key just really want to see what's on there, plus you have these people who really aren't committed in the long run of like building on that platform in the first place, like, and then you have this whole in real life kind of pending upon us. I would really see something like this kind of taking a dump. I hope I'm wrong. Um, but LinkedIn has events. You just mentioned how like Twitter's kind of coming out with more of a direct competing version. I'm sure Facebook or Instagram, one or the other, probably won't be long after. Maybe even what's like, who knows? Um, yeah,
Yeah, I mean, Facebook already has Messenger's audio capability, right? So you think
yeah.
that they would have come out with something like this. And then I was kind of expecting LinkedIn to come out with something similar in the professional realm, but who knows?
If they were smart, they would use this as a good way to do some practical research. Like they have such a tremendous opportunity to connect the professional sides of the world, like just based on the community that was built on. But I mean, they've lost ground, in my opinion, like trying to pursue that unique differentiation or that value because they've allowed too many everyday creators on, like, not allowed, but those people are flooding the platforms now.
It's also not moderated. Like there's not an easy way to get people that are harassing others to stop off the platform. There's a lot of background issues with that, right? Women frequently are posting and outing, people that are harassing them.
Men,
I
yeah,
see it all the time.
messages and stuff like that. Yeah, bad.
Yeah, yeah. Unwanted advancement on a professional platform. I shouldn't make that women and men, but that's what I've seen.
Yeah. Should we talk about another type of unwanted advancement due to social in the financial scene right now? You were bringing up just before the
Oh
call there.
yeah. I mean, I was wondering if any of you have been following what was happening with GameStop this week.
I haven't.
I did a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there was sort of a movement against short sellers, people that were short selling the stock. And I just thought it was such an interesting example of, should there be financial services or financial investment advice readily available on social? Should people be able to share, hey, I'm shorting this stock, or think people should buy more of this stock, or what have you, without any due diligence? What do you guys think?
Well, I just kind of hearing about this, it makes me, I don't know if we talked about it on the social report. We may have, but when Dave Portnoy was talking about his day trading and he was like doing his trading advice, and someone was talking about how essentially like he was doing his like daily or Davy day trade or whatever, and he would hype up a stock and then all his followers would go and buy this stock. And so they pump the stock up and then he would just sell it. And so like he could basically just like impact the market with these live streams because they got so popular. But like is that not illegal for like from my understanding that's illegal, but there's no
Well, it's called pump
repercussion.
and dump. And if you've
Yeah.
ever seen like the Wolf of Wall Street, that's kind of what they did, right? They had a phone room where they'd be phoning people to buy the stocks, and then at the height, they would all dump it, right?
I honestly I've seen that movie once and I had the flu, so I think I slept through half of it. So I've got to get back and rewatch it. But but yeah, that was just
Whoever said that about the Wolf of Wall Street, Jacob.
I was so sick. It was not even.
It's a long movie, to be fair.
It is, yeah.
But no, that's just what I thought when you said that. Like it brought me back to the Davy Day Trader or whatever he called his thing, and I feel like I feel like it's a fine line, right, between sharing because like investment advice versus pump and dump. So, but like talk to us a little bit more about the GameStop situation.
Well, I mean, basically, short sellers were trying to really kind of downgrade the stock, and Robinhood traders, who tend to be skew younger, it's a much loved brand, and a lot of them basically said that they weren't having it. And there's been, venture capitalists have even gotten on board and put some money into the stock. Um, so I think, basically the investors basically drove the stock up to the moon, right? And some of the discussion around this has taken place on TikTok and Twitter and definitely in social. So,
and I suppose the point that she has kind of made in a nice way is also it's at a dangerously high price. Now for that company, where like if you look back historically really quickly, you can check this out on Google, but go look at GameStop Corp. You look at their stock, just toggle between the 1 day, 5 day, 1 month, and 6 month 6 months ago, that stock was at $4 US. It's currently, at the time when we're recording this, at 148.35, which is astronomical growth. And the actual high before this point was about 32 USD near its start. So a, a bit, yeah, a bit of, actually, it was, the high was 62. I was mistaken, and it's max. So this is going back to 2008, just before the crash, and it did get back up to about 56 in just before 2014, but dangerously
But I mean,
high right now.
GameStop is like everyone else in COVID, right? Like having issues, and they're not predicted to be profitable again until 2023. And so they've seen their valuation triple over the last month or a couple weeks to $4.5 billion. Now, is that a good news for them? I don't think so. I don't think they want to be caught up in that kind of hype, right? But you got to love the loyalty of the brand loyalty that they have built with those investments. But basically what's happening, it's a war between investors and short sellers, right? Like that's what's happening.
Yeah, it's 36 times growth since May.
And so, but so all the people that are buying the stock, you said there's a lot of the younger people who are fans of the company. Was it part of it because they were getting short sold? They just invested in it to kind of prop the company up because they love it so much. Like, was that kind of what started this whole thing?
It's like anti-short sellers. Like they don't like short sellers. They think of them as parasites of investing. And basically they also love the brand. So it's like, hey, let's hype this. I think there's been headlines, let's hype this stock up to the moon, right? So people are buying, and that's creating more and more momentum. But then, and the short sellers are really in trouble from it. But I don't see how that's going to benefit GameStop at all. When it all comes crashing down, it's going to be bad. So
yeah, those typically don't turn out well, those types of situations. But I mean, hopefully they can minimize the damage, like for the brand side of it, given that they really they do have a high upside once we get back into a normal way of life. With that gaming industry, the way it's headed, and certainly not, the likes of an Apple, but there's upside there. So hopefully they can minimize the damage because.
yeah, I don't think they'll have any damage. I think it's gotten them a lot of PR. They've seen that they have tremendous brand advocacy. But I would also say it's sort of put this on the radar of people like FTC and regulators. Should we be allowing discussion and suggestion and these kinds of things that create rallies around stocks to be in social? Again, it's like censorship, free speech. What do you think?
It's an especially interesting time to have the conversation, given what's just gone on in the Senate, right? With the votes earlier this month, the flip, Mitch McConnell out, potentially, marijuana making a huge entrance into the states, and that will, what that will do for the market just in that category alone in the coming years would be pretty wild. But particularly on social, I guess the reason why I reference that is I know a friend, who's already kind of jumped on that opportunity of putting content out that educates the masses, that now we're going to have the opportunity to invest in an industry that's never before been available to them. And so, that particular situation is a good example of I don't think they should ever stop the communication or the dissemination of information across the web. But for every person who sees that, if you're willing to invest your money, you do so at your own risk. You got to have a huge understanding of this is like walking up to the craps table and placing the wrong bet.
Yeah. If you're taking your investment advice from a TikToker and you don't do diligence, you kind of deserve whatever comes, right? No disrespect to people on TikTok. I love TikTok, but
No,
yeah. But I would say, I think there's a certain, generation that is kind of burned by the more traditional forms of investment advice, right? So I also understand that too. I'm in favor of just having, continuing to have people talk about investments because I think it's healthy. think it's healthy to talk about what's real, what's not real, what's worked, what's not worked, for people to share their experiences. But I do think it's buyer beware.
Yeah, 100%. I tend to agree. I don't think there's a point in censoring people from sharing their stock, like their advice, because I think to your point with people who are so frustrated with the advice they've been getting, if you stop letting people sharing practical advice, then we're just putting all the power back into the people who were sharing not the greatest advice to people over the last couple generations. So I feel like this is creating in short term for GameStop, probably not the greatest scenario. I think macro, like it'll net out more positive for people because they'll have a better understanding of what to invest in.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I mean, free speech, I'm all for it. And I do think there's a certain amount of the population that needs to just have a little bit of tolerance and scroll by stuff they don't like. Right. But I'm personally happy with the way Twitter is today. So I see both sides of it. Maybe it's the extremes, like like everything else. You set up rules and policies to follow in communities and on platforms, but the people who generally violate it all the time, that's who they should be censoring, maybe not the, 99.999% of people who are good intention and may just have a different opinion.
But no, does anyone have anything else here before we jump off?
Well, I just want to give a shout out to Jacob. You also launched a super cool documentary on David Dobrik, who we've mentioned like many times throughout this podcast, haven't you? Like, didn't that just come out?
Yeah, I guess just over a week ago now. Yeah.
I'm gonna have to go check it out. Provide some links.
Yeah, I'll put it.
Will you?
Yeah, I really want to check that out too.
Yeah, no, it was, I kept it super on the down low. Like I didn't really tell a ton of people about it just because I was like, I wanted to make sure I did it. And two, I just kind of wanted it, like, no one was expecting me to do it. So I said, I'm just going to drop it. And like, I feel like it's gotten a pretty decent response so far. I'll put it in our Slack channel. I'll put it in the show notes as well. But it took me like 2.5 months to do. And so the impetus of it was I have a podcast that went viral, 820,000 views. And
oh wow,
on YouTube. And it's because I interviewed a YouTuber. And I was like, all right, well, I just gotta interview big YouTubers and like the podcast is gonna do well. Like obviously like that's what I gotta do. Easier said than done, of course. Mm-hmm. So I was like, well, what if I do the podcast research and instead of interviewing someone, I presented it in a story and like the same way I would structure it, the same way I do everything, but then I kind of I answer everything in my documentary. And I use all the footage I use like for research, interviews, articles, and I would like cut back between me and these interviews to provide context or back up what I'm saying. And so it's about an hour and a half long. It's 90 minutes. I've shared it with a couple, tried to share with some different fan pages. I'm getting some good reaction from both non-David Dobrik fans and diehard David Dobrik fans, which I think is really good. My girlfriend watched it. She sat through an entire 90-minute video, which is super rare. So, I mean, I thought that was a pretty good stamp of approval. So, yeah. And I launched a merch store alongside of it for fun, with all clothing related to the documentary. So it's not like my face on a shirt. It's like one of the documentary's in 10 chapters, and one of the chapters is called King of the Internet. And so one of the sweaters has a little crown on it, says King of the Internet underneath it, and just like little nods to the video. So you can still appreciate the designs without knowing me or even having watched the video technically. But so it has nothing to do with me. It's all related to this documentary that I made.
That's awesome. I'll go check it out.
Thank you. Congrats.
Thank you.
I know your work is of a high quality, and so I'm excited to watch. And just congrats on getting that done. That's an amazing accomplishment, dude. So yeah, super cool.
Thank you. I appreciate that. No, I appreciate you bringing that up. For anyone listening, that was not planned. Like I didn't ask for to do that for some self-plugging here. So no, I appreciate you bringing that up.
I just did that because I knew that anybody who's still listening to this right now would really want to watch that too.
No. Post that link on your bio in Clubhouse.
Yeah, I should. I honestly like my Clubhouse. I only have an iPad though. That's the problem. So I can only use Clubhouse on my iPad. So I don't have it on my phone right now. Yeah, we're running out of time here. So I just want to give both of you the floor. Where can the people find you? Plug anything and everything you got right now.
I mean, I'm Jane Bond on most social platforms, but I'm also CMO of Trufan and Player.gg. So come and see our brand channels too.
Awesome. Yeah. And Scott Berty, Berty on socials. Echoing what Karen said though.
Perfect. Awesome. I want to thank you both once again for taking time to be on the podcast. I want to thank everybody for listening, whether you've listened the entire way through or you only listen to bits and pieces. I really appreciate you taking time to check this out. Everyone do me a big favor. Go and follow Scott. Go and follow Karen. Go and check out Trufan. Check out player.gg. I'll make sure everything's linked in the show notes down below, along with links to all the stories that we talked about today. If you'd like to follow me, you can find me anywhere on social media at the Jacob Kelly. Feel free to come and say hello. My DMs are always open. If you'd like to follow the podcast, you can find us on Instagram at My Social Life Podcast or YouTube by searching up My Social Life. As always, today's podcast is powered by Trufan. Thank you once again for listening, everybody. We'll talk soon.